U.S. Attorney Jay Stevens, can General Manuel Noriega get a fair trial in the U.S.?
Kathy, I think he can. The American judicial system is designed in such a way that the court propounds questions, asks questions to potential jurors to ferret out those that cannot deliberate fairly and deliver a fair verdict. We've seen a number of cases here in the United States of highly visible targets, defendants, very substantial amounts of publicity surrounding those trials, and defendants in those kinds of cases have gotten fair trials. I think the system is designed not to get a juror who has never heard of a case, but to get a juror who can deliberate fairly and make a decision based on the evidence that he or she hears in the trial.
Is there precedence for this type of situation, bringing a former leader of a country here to stand trial?
Well, perhaps not necessarily a former leader, but here in Washington we have tried the first international terrorism case where we brought an individual from overseas back to the United States to stand trial, an individual who was, through a ruse, brought into the Mediterranean, then flown back in the United States. So I think you will see more and more cases in the future because of the internationalization of crime. You'll see more and more cases of bringing foreigners back into the United States. Indeed, the Department of Justice has worked very long and hard during the last decade to develop extradition treaties, to develop assistance treaties to get evidence from foreign countries, and we have passed laws and statutes that give us jurisdiction over individuals that affect U.S. criminal laws, even though they're operating outside the United States.
Good evening from Washington. We're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so discussing the charges against General Manuel Noriega, and our guest this evening is U.S. Attorney Jay Stevens. We'll be taking your calls in just a few minutes, and let me give you the numbers that you will be using tonight. Eastern or Central time zones, please use 202-628-2525. Mountain and Pacific, it's 202-783-2727. And for those of you calling outside of the United States, the number for our international callers is 202-737-6734. And just a reminder, as always, C-SPAN has a 30-day policy. If you have called and participated in the last month or so, please don't call us this evening. If you could for us, go through in detail how this case will proceed. First of all, what are the specific charges against Mr. Noriega?
Mr. Noriega is facing two indictments in the United States, one in Miami and one in Tampa. The Department of Justice intends to try Noriega first in Miami. This case, like many other complex cases, complex narcotics cases in particular, will take some time. Today we had an arraignment. There will be then a series of motions filed by defense counsel. The government, of course, will have an opportunity to respond to those motions. In this kind of case, given the nature of the case, you will see some complex maneuvering with regard to potential evidence relating to the CIA, for example. There will be some jurisdictional questions about the ability of a court in the United States to try Mr. Noriega. So I think you're looking down the line several months before all those motions and all those legal maneuverings are resolved for a trial perhaps sometime later this year.
How was it decided what court this case would go to?
The indictment in this case against Noriega was returned in Miami. It alleges a conspiracy from 1982 to 1986. And the investigation was developed in Miami. It was venued there because of contacts involved in the criminal enterprise that related between Panama and Miami or and Florida. So that is the place where the case developed, and that's the place where the case should be tried.
Does Mr. Noriega have attorneys at this point?
He has an attorney who has been representing him today. His attorney appeared in court with him and raised jurisdictional arguments with regard to his client. The court today entered a plea of not guilty, which is a standard plea at arraignment, and the trial will proceed from there. I'm sure he will be represented by counsel in a very vigorous, aggressive, able manner.
And who will serve as the government's prosecutor in the case?
There will be a number of individuals, assistant United States attorneys and perhaps Department of Justice attorneys out of Florida or out of the Department of Justice here in Washington.
You mentioned briefly about classified information. Do you suspect that that will be a problem in this case?
Well, you see more and more in complex international cases, defenses being raised that a defendant has been involved with an intelligence agency or an intelligence source of some kind. And frequently that, at least in my experience, is an issue that is raised as a smokescreen for the defense, an effort to get at certain types of classified information, an effort to develop a defense that may preclude the government from bringing charges, an attempt to embarrass the government, those kinds of issues. In this case, I think it's no secret that at least Noriega and even our government has acknowledged that there were certain aspects to intelligence that Noriega historically may have participated in with regard to the intelligence community. But I think the judgment has been made by the intelligence communities here in the United States, by the Department of Justice, by the administration, that there is nothing in that intelligence data that would be either so embarrassing to U.S. interests, and I say embarrassing in the sense of damaging our relationships with other countries, that would preclude this trial. So I think that issue probably has been vetted quite thoroughly within the government itself here before determining whether or not to return the indictment, and of course to seek Noriega's return to stand charges on that indictment.
Do you anticipate a long, drawn-out trial?
I think it's fair to say this will be a lengthy criminal proceeding. As I indicated, I anticipate there'll be a number of motions filed with regard to discovery, a number of motions filed with regard to trying to get access to the government's case, if there are tape recordings, electronic surveillance, if there's intelligence data, as we said, issues about jurisdiction of his standing trial here in the United States. I think it will take several months for the court to resolve those kinds of questions. And then you move into a trial, and this is a complex case. There are 15 co-defendants charged in the indictment. They may not all be there to stand trial with Noriega, so in some respects it may be more immediate and directly focused on him. But the indictment has several counts, and including very complex narcotics conspiracy counts. So I would anticipate a relatively lengthy trial that occurs after a substantial amount of additional legal maneuvering preceding that trial.
Again, our guest this evening is Jay Stevens. He is the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia and has held that position since March of 1988. Let's go to a call from Detroit, Michigan. You're on the air.
Yes. I just have one question to add. Now that we've invaded Panama and turned that country upside down, are they planning on invading Peru, Colombia, San Salvador, and all these South American countries, plus Turkey, that are exporting drugs? I just want an answer to that. Thank you.
Well, I think the action directed by the President against Panama was a very specific surgical strike against a country that had thwarted, against a dictator that had thwarted democracy specifically. There had been a democratically elected government last spring in Panama. Noriega refused to cede to those elections. In addition to those issues, of course, Noriega was facing criminal indictment here in the United States for drug trafficking charges. Panama is strategically situated, of course, in the Central American area between Colombia and the United States. We've had many cases, even here in the Washington area, of drugs being transshipped from Colombia, Peru, and other South American countries through Panama to California to New York. So strategically it's important in the drug trafficking trade, and as the indictment alleges, Noriega himself was one of the principal facilitators of the drugs coming into the United States. So for a multitude of reasons, I think this was a limited surgical action against Panama to take out a dictator there who had thwarted democracy and to bring him to justice here in the United States.
Dearborn, Michigan.
Yes, my question is, what is the specific law that gives the U.S. the legal justification to go into a foreign country and take the leader back to trial in the U.S., and if this issue will be a major thrust of the defense of Mr. Noriega?
Well, I think you will see the defense, of course, his defense counsel raising that jurisdictional issue. He's already indicated that he intends to raise that issue. In many respects, your question asks two separate questions. Part of it is, what is the justification for the United States to go into Panama? I think that has been amply articulated by the State Department, by the Defense Department, and by the President. But more specifically, to go in and to get Noriega to return to the United States, I think what is made amply clear today is that Noriega voluntarily turned himself over to U.S. authorities, so that there is no issue of extradition, there is no issue of coercion. He voluntarily submitted to U.S. jurisdiction. He was brought back here. So I think in many respects that eliminates many of the potential legal issues of his standing trial here in the United States.
Honolulu, Hawaii. Good evening.
Yeah, hello. Hey, I want to ask the question. Are they going to use the Monroe document as part of the defense for the United States?
Well, I think the Monroe Doctrine, of course, goes to foreign policy questions and the U.S. Assertion of protective area of the Western Hemisphere. I think that probably is not an issue that will come up in the course of this trial. There may be some ancillary issues with regard to U.S. military action in Panama, but I think, as you can see by the reaction of the Panamanian people today and tonight, that they are literally ecstatic about the removal of Noriega from their country. So I think in many respects your specific question doesn't bear directly on the legal issues in trial, so I don't think you'll see that raised as a matter in the court.
For those of you watching this program live, at 8:05 p.m. this evening, we will air a Pentagon briefing that was held today concerning General Noriega's surrender. So join us at 8:05 for that. Now we'll take a call from Springfield, Illinois. You're on the air.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm glad to get on. Glad to hear you guys talking. My main concern is the man needs to go to trial and all, but it's kind of like it's a tug of war. You know, the man is a drug dealer. He has attacked the American people with these drugs, but it's still at the point where will he live to go to trial? Because you know, there's a lot of indication that the man has a lot of ties with Bush and with Reagan, Oliver North. It seems like they're all pretty much tied into there, and I kind of like to know, you know, will he make trial? Because Oliver North kind of slid underneath the reins of justice himself. So,
Well, first of all, I don't think your assumption that he has close ties to President Reagan, President Bush, other individuals, I think is probably not correct. While he may have had some relationship to U.S. intelligence, I think it's been made amply clear by both President Reagan and President Bush, and certainly President Bush in the last year here, that it has been a priority to try to restore democracy to Panama and to bring Mr. Noriega to justice here on an indictment returned in the United States. So I expect that certainly the President was successful and victorious in getting Noriega's voluntary return to the United States. I expect he will stand trial on those charges, and it will be up to a jury to decide his guilt or whether or not he is innocent.
Panama City, Florida. You're on the air.
Yeah, my question to the gentleman there was, number one, what actual law did he break? I mean, did he actually come into our country carrying the drugs? And what right did we have to go into his country and actually pull him out? Also, why don't we just go in and get Brezhnev for the violations Russia's been involved with against laws in our country, like spying and things like that?
With regard to what laws he broke, the indictment charges him with facilitating narcotics importation into the United States. The Congress has enacted a law. The President has signed that law. We have a number of laws on our books, criminal statutes, that provide for jurisdiction for those who seek to import into the United States narcotics, even though the source of those narcotics may be outside the United States. So if, for example, you're moving narcotics from the Bahamas or Mexico into Florida or into Georgia or into Illinois or wherever the case may be, of course, the result of that crime and the victims of those crimes are U.S. citizens. So the Congress has acted to protect U.S. citizens. The administration has sought that kind of protection. We have jurisdiction over offenses occurring overseas when American citizens are victimized. So the laws are pretty clear on that. With regard to the question of the U.S. Going into Panama, I think, as I indicated previously, that is a question in part of international law. Of course, Noriega himself declared war on the United States 2 days before our invasion. As the President has indicated, we had the brutal murder of a U.S. serviceman and a dependent of Americans down there. So the State Department has articulated the U.S. rationale for the surgical strike in Panama, and I think, as you have probably detected, the Panamanians have very widely supported that move and that action, and indeed, as I indicated before, are really quite ecstatic that democracy has been restored. A duly elected democratic government is in power, and Noriega, as he has been termed a drug thug, is now out of that country and is back in the United States to stand trial.
Portland, Oregon, you're next.
Yeah, I'm just amazed at how they shovel the propaganda through this whole entire sordid affair. The U.S. invasion of Panama was illegal from the day one and continued in mean, the surrounding of the Cuban and Nicaraguan embassies, the invasion and search of the ambassador from Nicaragua, the blaring of loud music and harassment of the papal nuncio. I think when this all comes out, if the truth does come out about what Noriega's involvement with the CIA, and if Daniel Sheehan and the Christic Institute suit against 21 defendants is allowed to be fully heard and the truth be known, that George Bush is going to have to leave office faster than Noriega. And I think it's just another disgusting chapter in U.S. foreign policy towards the Third World and Central America, and it's just shameless. And I just wonder when it's all going to end. I mean, the Berlin Wall is coming down, the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc is becoming more democratic, but when are we going to allow the same kind of thing to happen in Central America?
Sir, quick question. Do you think that Noriega should stand trial in the United States?
I absolutely do not, but I am in a way very glad he is going to stand trial, because now the truth will come out, hopefully, if we are allowed to get to the documents that he needs to prove his case and his involvement with the CIA in cocaine running and of arms shipments. Then, the truth will come out, and what we didn't get out of the Iran-Contra trials so far, what has been suppressed by the administration and by the Justice Department.
I'll have to hold you there, sir. Thank you for your call.
Let me just respond briefly to that. I think, of course, the thrust of your question is entirely misguided. The truth of the matter is, and I think the facts will establish what the President has said, that Noriega indeed has, as alleged in an indictment at least, been involved in narcotics trafficking, that any relationships he may have had with U.S. intelligence is a relationship that the President and the administration and the government here is not afraid to have disclosed, indeed is willing to have disclosed, because they believe it's more important to bring this man to justice. And I think first and foremost and most fundamental, the action in Panama was an important act of United States foreign policy that restored democracy to Panama, and I think that is attested to most forcibly and eloquently by the actions of the Panamanian people.
Detroit, Michigan, you're on C-SPAN.
Yes, hello. I'd like to ask two questions right quick. What has been the posture of the United Nations with our country invading Panama? And most important, where is the money going to come from to aid Panama? Is it coming from our taxes? Will we have to give money from their taxes when we have many American people that are hungry and homeless? We have a tragic situation here. However, I do feel sorry for the people in Panama, but we have to think about what's happening to our people here.
Let me respond very briefly, because I think essentially these are questions that the State Department has addressed. First, I think the United Nations has not been active or particularly involved in the Panamanian situation. The Organization of American States did have some comments earlier on, but I think the Organization of American States has come around to view more positively the U.S. action in Panama. There may be some funds, U.S. funds, that are expended beyond, of course, the military operation to help stabilize Panama. Those questions have been addressed by Secretary of State James Baker, and I think he has addressed them appropriately and adequately to assist in bringing a degree of stability to Panama and help that country get its democratic government off the ground and flying.
Another call from Honolulu. Go ahead.
Yes. The gentleman on TV says that Noriega volunteered himself to the United States government, but he was surrounded by 25,000 Marines. Now, how can somebody volunteer when he's surrounded by that many Marines? And if that's the case, if the United States has passed a law saying that they can go and get somebody from another country to bring them into to be judged by the United States, then the Nicaraguans have a right to come after Ollie North, Vice President Bush when he was Vice President, Poindexter, and all those who were involved in the Iran-Contra affair because they was given arms to topple their government.
The issue of whether or not Mr. Noriega has returned voluntarily to the United States, I think, is relatively clear from the facts. While you say the papal embassy nuncio was surrounded by U.S. troops, that is the case, but Noriega himself sought asylum there. He is the person that put himself into that situation. There were negotiations that went on for nearly a week, or perhaps more than a week, as to whether he would be granted political asylum, whether or not he would move to a third country, whether he would be turned over to the Panamanians themselves, or whether he would do some other action and be returned to the United States. He walked out of the embassy. He walked to the U.S. custody. He was not forced to do that. So I think it is clear that while the U.S. was not in a position to watch him escape, there was a negotiation as to where his final destination would be. He chose to come to the United States as the best alternative for him, and I think that is the kind of issue that the court will determine is a voluntary return to the United States, even if that were not an issue, because, of course, legally there are some substantial questions whether or not you have to have a voluntary return in order to stand trial here, because we've had cases where people have been lured out on a ruse, or perhaps even where they have been taken out by a degree of force with the cooperation of the host government. So I think your question really perhaps misses the point. I think he was voluntary in his return to the United States, and I think the courts will find that to be the case.
San Antonio, Texas, good evening.
Yes, good evening. I have a couple of questions for your guests there. First of all, I wonder if anybody can really state what Noriega's exact language was on this declaration of war, or did he simply state that the way the United States is acting, the United States is acting as if Panama declared war on the U.S.? Does somebody have the exact language on that? Also, how does he compare the situation with Duvalier in Haiti and Marcos in the Philippines? Both those guys were crooks, but nobody has come on TV and said, or no administration officials come on TV and said publicly that those guys were crooks. And we have facilitated their moves to third countries or different countries or safe havens, whatever you want to call it. Also, I do believe Noriega should stay on trial in the U.S. I don't have any problem with that. But I believe there's people in the administration who should also be on trial, too, such as the thing with the Iran-Contra, people who have testified or have pleaded the fifth or whatever. And also, I would like to see that George Bush, or at least ask a question, why doesn't George Bush and the administration pursue the people involved in the SNL crisis with the same tenacity that they pursued General Noriega?
Sir, we'll have to hold you there. It's a few questions.
That is quite a few questions. Let me start backwards. I think it's fair to say the government, the Department of Justice, is pursuing fraud in the SNL crisis with great vigor. We're getting a number of additional prosecutors to work those cases. They are complex, long cases, and the Department of Justice and the administration, of course, is committed to bringing to justice those who have defrauded depositors throughout the United States. More specifically with regard to Noriega and the declaration of war, I've addressed that previously. Of course, the State Department has addressed that, Noriega's declaration of war, his acts of war against U.S. citizens in Panama, and the President has stated very clearly, I think, his justification for moving into Panama, and I think that justification is consistent with U.S. law and with international law. With regard to Noriega, he is charged in the United States with narcotics trafficking in 2 separate indictments, a number of counts alleging major conspiracies involving literally hundreds and hundreds of pounds of cocaine. He's alleged to have obtained more than $10 million for his services in facilitating the importation in the United States of narcotics. He stands in similar shoes to Mr. Marcos, who you alluded to. Indeed, as you know, Marcos was subject to judicial process here in the United States and recently obviously died before that judicial process was brought to completion.
What charges or what penalty possibly will Mr. Noriega face?
There are 2 indictments, as I've indicated, Kathy. In the first indictment in Miami, there are 12 or so counts. Those counts, if he is convicted on each count, would subject him to a penalty of up to 165 years. The indictment in Tampa is a shorter indictment. It's a 3-count indictment, again alleging various kinds of conspiracy and importation charges. That would subject him to a 45-year penalty. So all total, of course, that's about 210 years. Some of these charges, if he's convicted on all, may of course run concurrently. But the bottom line is there is a substantial penalty that he faces if he is convicted.
Any chance of the death penalty in this?
There is not. The death penalty is not applicable to this the way the indictment is structured. It's from 1982 to 1986. The death penalty for drug kingpins wasn't enacted until 1988.
We have time for one last call from Linwood, Washington.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I have a couple of quick questions here. First off, I do agree Noriega is a criminal, and I think he should be brought to justice in this country. I think we should start here at home, though. I think Mayor Berry there in District of Columbia, of course, you're the district attorney there, is an obvious criminal. I think he should be brought to justice, irregardless of the political consequences for that. And I'd also like to ask, since we've set a precedent now, why don't we go after Robert Vesco in Cuba and indict Fidel Castro and Vesco down there, because they're also involved in a lot of drug dealings as well. Thank you.
Again, several questions close to home here. You probably know, and certainly no secret, there's been a lot of public comment that we have an ongoing investigation here involving Mr. Berry. Beyond that, I don't think I should comment. With regard to other potential narcotics traffickers and dealers, of course, the United States has pursued Mr. Vesco in the past for some of his fraudulent activity and stock fraud activity. I think Noriega does not stand in a category by itself. As I said earlier, we really have seen an internationalization of the criminal issue. We at the Department of Justice have sought to reach beyond our borders to gather evidence, and where individuals operating beyond our borders seek to poison the citizens of this country or to terrorize American citizens in skies over the United States or over the high seas, we will seek to bring them to justice here in the United States, because it is American citizens who are the victims of these crimes.
Do you expect that Mr. Noriega will return to Panama for trial as well?
Well, the Panamanians have indicated that after standing trial on charges here in the United States, they would like him returned to Panama. I think that is a situation, of course, that will remain open. The Panamanian Attorney General has indicated that he would like to file charges, if he has not already filed charges, against Mr. Noriega. So I think that is a second part of this whole enterprise, is that after Noriega stands trial on charges here in the United States, whatever the result of those charges, he may very well face additional charges in Panama.
Jay Stevens, United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, we thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
To our viewers, please stay with us. We'll continue with another discussion about promoting democracy abroad in just a moment.